are you able to edit after you're done? If I make slip-ups or something like that, which I will.
We will say no to that, but if, you'll see, of this 30 minutes.
I'll try it. I tend to go too fast before I think, so we'll work our way through it.
Jim, thank you for coming. Seriously, thank you for coming the distance and being part of what we're calling the 150th retiree project. It's our way of giving back to Plymouth State. For those of us that were here for decades, we've seen changes go on, and we just want to capture them if we can, the memories and the stories that you have. So that's what we're going to try to pull out of you today, a little bit. So here we go. What is your full name, sir?
Full name, James Calvin Hobart III.
Is it a namesake? Were you named after someone?
Oh yes, the family name goes all the way back actually to early Plymouth. In fact, when I first came to town, the president's secretary, Lorraine Blake, said to me, she says, "Do you know the first white male baby born in Plymouth was James Hobart?" And I said, I had no idea. I said, I should have asked what his middle name was.
When you came here, was it PTC, that's a joke, PSC or PSU?
PSC.
And what years were you here?
From 1977 to 1995.
And can you remember your first year's salary, if you're comfortable sharing it with the audience?
It was around 20,000, maybe 22,000, I don't know, something like that.
And at that time,
it went further in those days.
Can you recall the number of students that we might have had here on campus at that time?
It was around 2,600 full-time students. I don't count the part-times in that, but it was around 2,600.
Right. The number of employees that we had, is that something you can come up with?
I was thinking about that, and I'm not sure I can come close on that, so I think I better skip that one.
So in your entirety, how many years were you employed at Plymouth State?
18.
18. And you were coming from where? A position beforehand?
I came from Keene State College, where I made a lateral move to here, from the same kind of position I had there as here. So it was the same.
And prior to that at Keene State?
I was then in the city of Keene as a city manager for 7 years.
What capacity were you hired? What position did you hold here?
Well, I've always been the same position, but it had 4 titles, starting with business manager and working up to chief financial officer, and then I think it became after that, after I left, it became a vice president for finance, I'm not sure. But it was always the same job, director of administration, director of business affairs.
Can you explain to our audience what responsibilities you had with 1 or 2 of those positions?
Yeah, well, there's all the same position, but I had personnel, I had the beginning of the computer department, which came to full fruition while I was there. Accounting, controlling, contracts, dining contract was under me. I had telephone systems. Let's see, what am I missing? A lot of internal administration.
Do you know how many employees you might have had amongst that group?
Do I know of employees in that group? Yeah, I can tell. Barbara Fahey was a principal person as a bursar and controller. I had Peter Hart, who was an outstanding computer person, but not a very good people person. He did a great job though in getting the computer program started. And after him, Steve Burrell, that was in computers. Bob Kroger, excellent guy who died a long time ago, unfortunately, of I think some form of leukemia. But anyway, he was in charge of telecommunications, and he wired every one of the dormitories so that everything was connected. And those copper wires did a lot for the development of the computer clusters. I had a dining contract at the time, which I eventually turned over to Dick Hage. What else? That's pretty much basically the operation.
You were a busy person.
Yes, I worked many long hours.
What contact, if any, did you have with our students?
Very little. We had for several years it was a freshman orientation course, and I took 2 sections of that. and I realized I was a better administrator than I was teacher. So, I mean, I enjoyed doing it, and I enjoyed the students, and I saw there's a certain kind of student that makes up the Plymouth model, we'll call it, and I enjoyed them because they're normal people, not burning with ambition. And, you know, they were a service orientation. They came from, lots of them came from families who were first-time students, and that was fun. But I realized I really wasn't a very good teacher, so yeah, no, they enjoyed it, and I enjoyed it, but I don't think I got them anywhere.
What were your first few years at Plymouth like?
I've been thinking about that, and when I came here, I was part of a wave, a new wave. The old wave was Harold Hyde, Art Hansen, Frank Alcott, and it was very authoritarian, retired military types in many ways, centralized, controlling. Harold Hyde was that way. He trusted his staff to be that way, but he also hired a lot of good people. He was excellent when it came to hiring faculty, for example. And a whole group of faculty came in the 70s who really formed the basis of a new general education mentality. I came in with Casper Marking, Bill Schmerney, Dick Hage. There was a new group coming in, John Clark, and they were now the principal administrators, and it was a go-go group. It was, let's do things, and it was expansive, it delegated, it was creative. So a lot of things happened in that period, which I think was very dynamic, at least it was in my perspective. And my perspective in higher education is limited to Keene and Plymouth, so.
The changes were as a result of the increasing number of students coming here?
No, I don't know. Well, there was a desire on the part of the faculty to have a more general education. That was going on. And it was just the principal programs for teacher education, and there was a nascent business program, but that was about it in terms of where are we going. But then things began to get busy, and a lot of directions were going at once, and some of the real movers were joining the staff. So things happened. A lot of things happened from '77 to '95, and I'm sure they have since.
So when you say real movers, part of those are the administrators that were coming through the door?
My view is pretty much limited to the principal administrators. It's presidents and this Dean of Student Affairs, which has another title now, I'm sure, and the assistant to the president, who was also the athletic director, and the chief academic officer, whom we called the Dean of Academic Affairs at that time. I worked with them, and not too many further other than in my own organization.
Thank you. When you got the offer, when you received the offer to come to Plymouth State, why did you say yes? You've implied it was a lateral move for you?
Yeah, I had reached the point of being very dissatisfied with the person I was working for at Keene, and I wanted to get out because he was an alcoholic, and he had a wild temper, and he caused the union to form because of unkept promises. I mean, so that was my story. I was ready to move somewhere, and I was offered a job in a position as city manager of Decatur, Illinois. And I said, well, I think maybe I'd rather stay in higher education because I enjoyed the faculty, staff, and students. I enjoyed being on a campus. It had a great sense of humor, and it had some very intelligent people who knew a lot of things, which made life very interesting. City management is more limiting in that regard. So I took a lateral move, didn't get a salary increase or anything. We just sold a house to the first person who put a bid on it, and we moved to Plymouth, got an old farmhouse in Rumney, and there I was stuck for a long time, and I enjoyed it.
When you arrived, 93 would have been, 93 was here, so you would have come off the exit 25 and drove through the town of Plymouth. What were your thoughts?
I love those mountains. When I got to the 5-mile view, my salary requirements were dropping about $500 per month every mile I drove, because I said, oh, I love this location. I'm an outdoors guy, an outdoors family. We fish, we hike.
That's great. Perfect location for you.
It was a perfect location.
Sounds great. After you arrived in Plymouth, what was it over the next few years? What was it about the college and the town that made you feel, and you may have already answered this, that you made the right decision to come to Plymouth?
I think we've covered that. I like the small college atmosphere. That's what it was at that time. But I also liked the fact that it was in the mood for change, and I'm a guy who cares a lot about change. And it was a good fit.
Sounds great. Was there someone at Plymouth that had an influence over you when you first arrived? They could have supported you, mentors, colleagues that you enjoyed working with, being with?
I enjoyed my fellow principal administrators, principally Casper Marking and Bill Schmerney, who wasn't here that long, but he was a real interesting guy, anthropology, and this, I don't even know if this wasn't his first job as the chief academic officer, but he was just a very nice, very presentable, very intelligent, very humorous person. I remember playing volleyball with him in my front yard, for example.
That's cute. That is cute. Where did Casper Marking go after Plymouth?
He was one of 3 people from Plymouth who became chancellor of the university system. Casper Marking, Bill Farrell, and Ed McKay became chancellor too, and he was, when I first came, he was at the I was on the search committee. He came from New York State to be director of the student union. And Ed had a lot more to him than being just a director of the student union. So when there was a suggestion that he go to the university system as a budget officer, as a chief budget officer for the system, I urged Ed Smith, the vice chancellor, to give him a try. And while Ed was skeptical, Ed Smith was skeptical. Ed McKay proved to be a major winner, to the point where he got his PhD, and then he became the chancellor himself.
During the time that you spent at Plymouth, what were the major changes that you can recall? It could be town, it could be university.
I'll give you 3 that I cared about a lot. One was the town and me, a group of 5 of us, Tom Terrio, me, let's see who else was in this, Steve Rand, and a couple others, Paul Montour. We formed a chamber of commerce. And with the idea of working on, my view was town-gown relations, but their view was an amalgamation of the town merchants to do some things. And I don't know what's happened to the Chamber of Commerce now. I'm sure it's still functioning, but it certainly got involved with the marketing of Plymouth. And Plymouth looks a lot different than it looked when I first came. It looked like a mill town. It looks like now a mill town with flowers and some interesting stores. So it's come a long way. Silver Hall, that's another program. I worked hard on the Cultural Arts Center. I was in charge of the program, the employee contribution part of it. And we were getting nowhere until we got the university to adopt payroll deductions for contributions. And then all of a sudden we ended up with $175,000 in contributions from the employees. That's a big plus. The programs I cared about the most were energy management, conservation, big program. I spent a lot of time on that, ending up with a cogeneration plant and a lot of savings which were plowed back into the university's budget, which enabled the place to grow. And computers. I was a computer guy, and we had computers everywhere, including a fee to go with them. I'm sure the fee's still in place. The technology fee, we called it, first one in the university system. And we were building clusters and connecting everything and trying to work in the dining system and the door locks and the registration. Pretty soon, I think everything was hanging off fobs. I'm not sure.
Let's see. If I was to ask you, and please don't be humble.
Don't worry.
What would be the contribution that you gave back to Plymouth?
I think it was money, and that comes from we had a reputation in the university system of being well-run. It showed, and so we were not favored over the university, but we did well. And so when I wanted to get into an energy program, I hired a young architect. I didn't hire him, I put him on a contingent basis. You get a grant and you get paid. You don't get the grant, you don't. And that was Ward D'Elia, who's still pretty prominent in the area as an architect. He did a lot of the buildings throughout the state now. And he managed to get 7 grants from the state's energy project fund. And we did little things like building tram walls. We put in a recirculation system in the dining hall, and we began to accumulate funds that we would roll over into plant funds to reserve for future projects. So we kept doing that until we had enough money in that account to take out the boiler plant, which was in the middle of the campus, and move it over to the edge. We rebuilt all the steam lines, and we put in a cogeneration plant which produced energy from waste heat from the boiler system, which I now understand there's 2 big cogeneration plants in there, machines in there producing electricity and incidentally steam. So that we kept accumulating these funds, which permitted the dean to add, academic dean to add positions, and he got half and I took the other half and rolled it back into more energy projects. So by the end of all that, that's when I retired. So I spent the last 5 years concentrating on the cogeneration plant.
Who took your place?
Good question. I knew him, I had met him, but I cannot remember his name. He was there for about 4 or 5 years. He did quite well.
Mm-hmm. Talk about Plymouth, the town of, just for a minute.
Town, okay.
Yes, please. I always say we're a most unusual town. There are very few like us where you have a university in a small town, not a city, but a small town.
Right.
What kind of struggles have we had?
The struggle is that the townspeople feel put upon because they have this university in their midst, and the university, of course, demands services, lots of services of various types. And they kept wanting to put a price on the service. Even though we had our own security system, they wanted us to help pay for the police department. They had a good argument, but we resisted because we were underfunded by the state in the first place. So any money that came out of our budget was really coming out of the hide of the students. So I was part of the resistance to saying, well, we sympathize with your position, but we're not helping the students by doing this, and we want to help students to go to college. Keep the in-state tuition rates down. I remember some of my arguments. So that was a constant struggle because the town realized that they had to do a lot of planning around the college. They had to build, well, here's a good example. In part of the energy conservation program, we managed to cut our water consumption using a whole variety of humorous projects. Water dams in the Johns. We got the temperature of the water in the washing machine so low, I had a contingent of female students drop in one day and say, the soap won't separate, it's coagulated. Anyway, we had so many of these things going that we were saving half of our water by cutting leakage, cutting the amount of flushing going on and that kind of stuff. And that was great. All the shower heads changed. After that happened, the town realized that half their budget was being imperiled in the water department, so they doubled the water rate. They got their money back. So we didn't save a whole lot of money on water that year. Anyway, that's the kind of problem that in town gown, and I always since I was a former town manager, I was very sympathetic to the town and wanted to help, but did not want to help at the expense of the students, because I knew that our state legislature was very stingy when it came to resources for the campus. And we were living off out-of-state tuition, which, is nice if you get out-of-state students, but we had one major dip during my time where the out-of-state students went from 42% down to, 36 or 37. We had to recover $2 million, and that was a very, very difficult period.
Wow. As you think backwards, my question is, what changes, if any, have we learned from our past that might support those people that are working at Plymouth State today? In reflection, what has happened in the past that would help the people working there today?
Plymouth has always had, as far as I know, still does, had always had a community of collegiality, and that carried over. And I think there's a great deal of respect among the whole campus. It doesn't have divisions that are often apparent at other institutions, because I met with my fellow finance officers throughout New Hampshire and in the Eastern Association and in the National Association of the Business Professionals in Finance. And I noticed that many of them had problems of isolation within the campus. One program didn't talk to another program. Here there was a great culture of everybody knowing everything. And there were distinctions between operating staff and faculty and PATs, and those distinctions became less and less as they began to work on committees and together. I think that's been encouraged, and I think that's what has to be continued to maintain the character of Plymouth. Notice I'm not saying university or college or teachers. You know. If I did, I would keep saying Plymouth State College, because I never worked for Plymouth State University.
2004. Yeah. As you think back, is there a story or two, it could make the audience sad, it could make it happy, but something that you can remember about Plymouth, the town of, or the university?
Well, there was a lot of humor, and I'm trying to pick out a couple of items. I had one humorous item. This is a Dick Hage item. He was, when he came from Keene to Plymouth, he was in housing at Keene, and he came to Plymouth to work. I can't even remember his job title, probably still director of housing, but it was an upgrade. Anyway, he was tightly budgeted, as Dick always is, in his own personal finances. And he couldn't, there was a university policy that had just been introduced, but they said that we cannot waive this, and that is you could not cash out your accumulated vacation time. Well, he needed that badly to make the move. So, at that time, this was my last year at Keene, at Keene State. And at that time, we came up with a policy. I said, well, how about if we pay your moving expenses to go to Plymouth? I think it's the first time in the history of the university system ever where we paid moving expenses to move somebody from the campus rather than to the campus. That was one humorous one. I mentioned that the students complaining about the coagulated soap. I thought that was humorous. They did too, actually. Oh, there was a lot of, we had a lot of humor on our campus, and I hope it's still there, because it's sort of helps with civilization.
Along with the smiles, let's talk, was there a sad day during the tenure that you were here? Was there something happened locally, statewide, or nationally that comes to the forefront?
The worst tragedy was the murder of Teresa Reed, which had a big effect on the principal administrators. Because I remember we were really upset about it, and then Bill Farrell was the president at the time. John Clark announced it to us, and you know, that was a tough time. And all sorts of suspicions were flying around, you know, co-workers and students and all that kind of stuff, which eventually took a long time to lay to rest until some petty thief from elsewhere or had done this and confessed it. So that was the saddest.
Yeah. Is there something that we missed today that we should share with the audience?
Well, let me check my notes
Please.
here. I don't think so.
Think you're okay?
I like the presidents that were here.
Who were the presidents under your tenure again?
Well, first was Casper Marking. Actually, first was an acting president who was probably John Foley. And then, but shortly, Casper Marking came. And after him, we went through a variety. We had Mady Barrett, Theo Calico. We had Bill Farrell, who was I think, most professional president, very capable guy. In fact, I'm having lunch with his widow next week. And that was about it till, what, Theo Keller? That was the end.
Okay.
Theo was the last one.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for sharing your stories and the memories. I'm hoping, like other people, we enjoyed our tenure at Plymouth. We learned a great deal. We love the community that you were talking about. So I think that's one of the reasons why we feel this is a good gift to give back to the university for their upcoming 150th birthday. And I just hope